All right. So welcome everyone to Dr. Strangeplot, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Join a Writing Group. I was going to say and love the writing group. My name is Alkani. I am the moderator for today, and we have 5 wonderful panelists from across a number of writing group experiences who will be here today to kind of give their impressions of and their experiences on writing groups, how they've helped them, and hopefully, if you're interested in actually forming or joining a writing group of your own, how the writing group experience that they had, they're here to kind of give a reflection of what you might experience as well. So keep in mind, 5 people is not definitive for the entire scope of writing group experiences, because every writing group is different. Your mileage may vary. So go ahead and pull up my lovely outline here. So once again, I am Alkani. I am the moderator. I am also the principal facilitator for the Regional Anthropomorphic Writers Retreat, which is an event that is hosted by the Association for the Promotion of Anthropomorphic Writing, which will hopefully be a future 501c3 organization that is focused on promoting and helping furry writers improve their writing through networking, social awareness, and through our Keystone program, which is the retreat. So in order, I would like to go ahead and let the participants on the panel introduce themselves. So I'll start here with
You would start with me.
I would, because you're closest to me.
I know.
And if you could please give your name, your preferred genres, your recent publications, and the name of the writing group or groups that you're in.
Do we ever come up with a name for the writing group?
The Otter Pals?
No.
Best Friends
No.
Otter Writing Group?
No.
Super Otter Team?
Crap, there's 2 of them now.
We have a majority otter writing panel.
No.
Plurality otter. Yes, plurality otter.
So JD, as you were.
So I'm Jaden Drakis, but I go by JD. I have been most recently published actually downstairs in Heat. Also downstairs, Dogs of War 2 from Fur Planet, and Fang 8 from Fur Planet, and several others, but those are the ones you can pick up here. My preferred genres are fantasy. I do quite a bit of slice of life, and branching out into some science fiction. And I'm part of the DC area furry writing group, because that's what the Google Hangouts is called.
That's a perfectly acceptable name for it, even though we know it's otters.
Yes.
Okay, I'm James Stone. I'm in furry. I am Seer Otter, but my stories are by James Stone because I like to make things difficult. I prefer to write in horror and sci-fi. I do have a couple stories that should be coming out this year. You can find my works in Bleak Horizons. That's first on sale down at Fur Planet downstairs. And I am also in the DC area furry writing group.
I'm Mog Moogle, or in the mainstream writing group that I'm in, I'm also known as Tom or Leopold.
Leopold.
So, I am in, I attended RAR, and my RAR class has done kind of a writing critique group.
Copycats.
Yes. Well, it was a good idea. Don't fix it if it ain't broke. And I am also in a mainstream writing group called the Cincinnati Fiction Writers with TJ here. And we like to confuse people by both introducing ourselves as Tom. Bastard. And my preferred genres are fantasy, sci-fi, contemporary slice of life. And here at the con, we can pick up Dissident Signals from Fur Planet, which I would be more than happy to sign for you. I also have a poem in Heat 14 that I'm particularly proud of, as well as, let's see, what else would be here? My first publication, Fragments of Life's Heart, if you'd like to pick that one up, I'm also particularly proud of that story.
Hello, my name is TJ. I write a lot of primarily erotica, contemporary in nature. Recent publications with JD and Mog are Heat 15, Distant Signals. Past publications include Fang 7 and 8, will be in Fang 9, Roar 7, just to name a few. And writing groups I'm in, as as have been mentioned before this way, is the Cincinnati Fiction Writers, and my RAR year 2 class stuck together and has done writing groups through there, primarily online through Discord, but it works if we get critiques and out my words.
Yep.
Just a correction, I'm not in Heat 15, I'm in Heat 14.
Right. You also mentioned just the signals. That's what I was going off of.
Well, you mentioned, okay, never mind.
Hi, I'm Significant Otter. I was on the previous panel too, but I'm going to introduce myself again. I am published in Arcana, which you can find downstairs. Also, several anthologies by Thurston Howell Pub, Species Wolves, Species Foxes, and Dogs of War, and that's not Thurston Howell Pub, but I will also be in the upcoming issue of Fang. I tend to write any genre that facilitates juicy melodrama, tends to be slice of life and fantasy. But yeah, so I am in the RAR 2017 class writing group with TJ, and I'm also in the DC area writing group with Seer and JD. And Alcani. But yeah, so we've got this weird sort of linked writing groups of us three are in a writing group, me and TJ are in a writing group, and TJ and Mog are in a writing group, and these are all separate writing groups. But yeah, it's fun. Yes, so that's me.
All right, so now that introductions are done, I would like to say that this is intended to be an interactive panel, so if you have questions, you are more than welcome to raise your hand. We will try and get through the material to allow for more open discussion. We do have some kind of brief experiential things to share from the panelists. But other than that, if something comes to mind, please feel free to raise your hand and I shall call on you, and then the panelists will try and answer your question, one or more of them. So let's go ahead and start with the basics. So first off, panelists, what is a writing group? What in your definition do you feel that a writing group is? And if you all have some sort of consensus, then please feel free to have one of you answer.
Oh, I'll take this. Have you ever heard of herding cats?
That was the DC one, I hear. Really, a writing group is where a group of writers get together and talk about something that a person or persons in the group have worded on paper in some form or fashion, and they critique it usually.
It can be online, it can be in person, wherever it works, just a bunch of writers getting together, working on making each other's stories better.
Not necessarily having to get together, though. Sometimes it can, like I've done my RAR 2 class, sometimes we don't have the time to sit down and write together, but it's like, well, heck, I just finished my draft with an extension for the Rapid Size First, and I dropped it in that chat, and hopefully someone will be able to squib it real quick before I have to hit submit tonight. We'll see if that happens, but...
Try.
No, it's exactly that. I will say the in-person groups do tend to be more, well, the way our writing group handles it, we read 10 pages of stories from 3 different readers, and then we all go around and critique. And the in-person does tend to be a little more in-depth, I believe, but the online stuff, especially with people you know, can be just as valuable, you know, especially when they're of the caliber of the people that go to the Regional Anthropomorphic Writers Retreat.
So I have a question somewhere in the room.
Yeah.
Or you? Okay, please.
So would this be like the fiction classes in college where we like fiction writing, where we just sat in a circle and talked over like 1 or 2 people's stories a session?
Potentially.
Yeah, that could easily be a writing meet.
Oftentimes, with 5 people, if you meet in a month, you may have only 1 or 2 of the people who have finished a story in that month. You also might have the big anthology deadline that everyone was writing for, and you have 5 stories to critique that day. You often want to set like time constraints for how much you're giving yourself to critique the story for each person, because it can definitely take time when we've got everyone with a story, everyone talking for like 3 minutes with like 6 or 7 people. So it really depends on the month, it depends on what you're writing for, and it depends on how you want to structure the group. We'll often, in our DC group, just give each other however long we want if there's like 1 or 2 stories, but if there's like 4 or 5 stories, we will definitely be focusing on keeping it down to like 3 minutes so we can get through everything.
All right. So that being said, we've talked a little bit about what a writing group is, which essentially it's a group of people that come together to critique other participants' writing with the goal of helping them improve their stories and increasing the critiquer's skill so that they can more easily pick up on things in their own writing. But that being said, what do you all feel makes a writing group different or special compared to just a single beta reader or even a single group of beta readers?
Well, I would say it's like a dependable group of beta readers, because before I joined up with these guys, I would be like, oh, can I get somebody to beta read? And it was always a crapshoot whether I got somebody who, one, would actually beta read, and two, would give me reasonable stuff that I could work with. Whereas the DC writing group, we've now been going for a year. I have more of an idea of what their strengths are, what they're going to point out. I can sort of tailor my writing because I don't want them telling me, oh God, you did it again. So I think that's something that I think that the writing group improves upon over just straight beta readers.
Now, something that I think can be both a positive and a negative depending on how it's done, the ability to very, very carefully explain and not defend your work can be very different. There have been times I'll get a beta trade. Actually, I got one from Otter, and I'm like, hey, look, you put words on a page. I'm ignoring this. You clearly didn't understand this bit here, so I'm going to be ignoring that too. But it's different when you get that from one person, and then you hear it from 2 people, 3 people in a room at the same time. That can be either, and I'm saying very carefully, because you don't want to be saying, oh, well, you just didn't understand what I was going for. There's, you're wrong, and there's, here's what I was trying to do. How would you, and you can get that immediate feedback of, okay, I was trying to make this come off as a vision for the future. It's supposed to be foreshadowing. How could I do that better? And you can get that immediate feedback in a writing group. You can get that from a beta trade, but it's delayed. It has you have to go through words and not tone, inflection, body language. It's a lot harder to get some of that information across.
Right, we've got a question over there.
I actually talked to a friend of mine who asked me if I ever wanted to create a fantasy world, and I mentioned to him about how for the last 7 years or 5 years or whatever, I worked on and off on my own fantasy series, my own working rings, so to speak. And I mentioned to him about how the world in which this story exists in is basically a world that was created by a wizard and then was abandoned, and I guess he really likes that. And I mentioned to him about how you gain access to this world from this wormhole in a cave somewhere in Newfoundland, and I guess he didn't like the idea of it being the original world being Earth, and I know that's been done so many times.
Okay, I'm sorry. What's your question specifically about writing groups?
I'm just wondering if it's better to just like stick to create to just essentially create a fresh new world, or just like stick to what you feel works well.
So I actually think that seems like it's more of a world building question than an actual writing group's question.
Sorry.
So if you want to ask the panelists after the panel, I'm sure they'd be happy to perhaps talk with you about that and maybe answer some questions. But yeah, that's outside of the scope of the discussion.
I do have a writing group point that I can bring up that sort
Sure.
of feeds off of that kind of thing,
Sure.
and the last thing that TJ was talking about. In our DC writing group, in this past spring, brought this story, the Sphinx story to
Yep.
you guys, and it had this opening scene that was extraneous, and I was trying to figure out how to introduce a lot of this expository information for this character, and I was having a lot of trouble figuring it out. I like put in this whole scene where I had them going through these ropes trying to show how it was done, but it ended up being like almost an irrelevant scene that had a sharp tone switch when I moved out of it. And what happened was when I brought it to the group, they all commented on it, saying slightly different things, but things about like how it didn't really fit the tone, didn't really fit the piece. And with what TJ was talking about earlier, with how you can really explain what you're doing, it was an amazing experience with the writing group. After seeing that scene just wasn't working with anyone, being able to talk as a collaborative discussion, saying, this is why I put the scene in here, this is what I wanted out of the scene, but it clearly didn't work. You all had some good ideas. What do you think about this change? What do you think about restructuring the scene this way? And it was an amazing experience being able to have all these writers right there and collaboratively being able to brainstorm fixes for a problem that a lot of people had noticed.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that.
Another big advantage of writing groups is you have people in there that you know have specific talents. Like this guy hits me with highlighters all the time. He's great at catching repeated words. You might have someone who's great at writing fantasy settings, you know, at the world building aspect, and just whatever their specialty is. And you can really draw on that. Fortunately, our fiction writers group in Cincinnati, it's just packed full of talent. I mean, like agented authors. So it's a wonderful experience.
All right, so that being said, I think in some ways you all have talked in little bits about your writing groups, and I know that there are at least 3 different writing groups that are represented in the group of panelists here. But would each of you kind of be willing to talk about what kind of writing groups you're in? So I know there's been some of that that's already been talked about, but I think some interesting things that the audience might wonder about might be whether these support long form or short form. You know, some of the in-person versus online has been done. Some of the established versus new. You know, are these furry or non-furry writing groups, for example? So if you all wouldn't mind sharing those details, just to kind of give the audience an idea of the broad spectrum of the places you come from.
So,
But my spectrum is super narrow because I'm only in one writing group, and it's a furry writing group. And
in person.
In person, yeah. And we tend to, our genres are all over the place, and we all seem to have what we stick to somewhat. But we do have the genres themselves are spread, so we have you can get advice on different areas if you don't happen to write that genre much. So that was me.
And me.
And that counts for me too. And Otter.
Well, no, I'm in.
Except that you're in another one.
Yeah, I'm in 2. Right, and it's an interesting play between having 2 writing groups. Because with any story that I'm going to submit somewhere, I want as much feedback as possible on it. And sometimes it ends up being just like me ordering which writing group I'm sending it to based off of the timing factors. But also there are some very specific things that I know people are good at. Like in our local writing group, I get a lot of really, really good structural critique. People saying that this section doesn't work, or this scene needs this. I mean structural in sort of a scene setting way. And there's a lot of other really good critique, but I know that I can count on that kind of critique from my local writing group. With my RAR writing group, there's a lot of more, it's still structural, but focused on character, focused on the actual plot structure or conflict structure, how things make sense, and that kind of thing. And so when I'm looking at this story that I need to revise, I'll kind of like toss it to a different group depending on what I feel like is the biggest flaw with the story, so that I can sort of take that into account and work on revising that before sending it to the other group. I also have like an individual friend who's just like a devoted beta reader that I'll send it back and forth with, and I might fit them in before or after the writing group, depending on what the needs are and like what the strengths of the different writing groups are in relation with her own strengths for reviewing and critiquing.
Okay, so you have a question back there?
Okay, it's an actual question for forming a writing group. How do you find more people to add to your writing group?
So we do actually talk about that a little later in the conversation. So you're segueing us forward. So hang tight. We
I'm
will
sorry.
get to that.
No,
Okay,
no, it's fine.
Please don't
Hey,
apologize
yeah.
for asking questions. Like that's why we're here. I'm just letting you know we will definitely be talking about that soon. Just hang tight.
Right. And also, to return to your earlier one, on Sunday at 10 here, there's a fantasy writing panel. That's probably the best place for that one. Okay?
TJ Mogg, I'm curious about how a non-furry writing group interacts with your furry writing.
So actually, do you want to talk about the writing group and I'll talk about the secondary form of it?
Let's, I saw a question back there, let's grab
well,
it.
mine kind of dovetails into that because I write not safe for work furry stories.
So do I.
How do they dovetail into safer work furry writing groups or other writing
Okay.
groups? How do you get critique on those?
You ask.
Yeah, no, TJ's exactly right. Our Cincinnati Fiction Writers group, we've shared furry erotica there. And all we do is we preface it, we say, you know, we go to the group head and we say, hey, we're going to be sharing erotica. And she puts it in last, it's last in the group. And then when it's time to share it, she's like, okay, anybody not comfortable with erotica, you know, here's your chance to bow out, and then they just share it. So that's it, just ask permission. That's all you have to do.
With our writing group, I was actually the first furry to join this writing group, but it was still, words are words, stories are stories. You can still critique a story whether the characters have fur or not. You have to explain that, yes, these are like Bugs Bunny or Donald Duck, it's Disney's Robin Hood, and roll with that. But if you, for a quick and dirty explanation, that's what it is. By the by, my characters are going to be doing tab A to slot B. And that's not normally how I explain it, but I'm trying to be good for hours.
One of the issues I run into, though, is people so focus on the tab A slot B stuff that they're not giving me the feedback about the situation, the characters, the actual plot points. You're like, I like that part, I like that part.
And that just sounds like you need
How do
to...
you get, how can I elicit that feedback?
One thing that's important is if when you're writing something you're worried about a certain aspect of it, you can add a note in either the start of the story or to the person when you're sending it to them, or the group when you're sending it to them to get a critique, saying, hey, I know that there may be problems elsewhere that you'll catch out, but I'm particularly worried about this aspect of it. I'm worried about this opening scene in the Sphinx story that I wrote, and I'm not sure if what I did fixed the problem that I was trying to do. Could you guys focus on that a little bit and let me know what you think about it?
Or the other thing you can do is if you keep submitting stories with not safe for work and all you're getting back is, oh, that was a really great scene, then maybe excerpt out what you want them to look at and leave out the sentence.
Interesting.
But another point, with our writing group, it actually kind of has two forums, one that's more public and one that's not.
Right.
The way it works either way, the public forum, which is available on meetup.com, to where we post our weekly, our bi-monthly or weekly meets, depending on how you go. There are the rules there. You're bringing 10 pages. So my short stories are normally well over that. Like my last one was about 35. So I get to bring 10 pages. First 10, last 10, middle 10, depending on what I'm trying to focus on. That's what I bring, and we'll critique that. And that's all I get to share at that time until I can go again. Which, if you're working on a deadline, that may not happen. Now, we've done there's been short form, there's been long form. People have done novels. They've done multiple chapters of novels over multiple shares. We also have, as I said, there's a secondary group, which is kind of sort of secret and invite only. But there, people will share a whole novel. And we'll read through that novel, and we don't read live like we do at our weekly meets. Instead, we say, okay, cool, we sit down, we have food, okay, now let's talk about this book. Here are the things I liked, I didn't like, things that were great, could be better, what the heck was this? And carries on from there. It's still our general critique, just we're looking at the entire piece as a whole.
That's really interesting. So you guys do live sort of reads and critiques on the spot.
We do, for the weekly meets, they'll read 10 pages aloud. That's how T-Dax was read aloud.
Yes.
God. But
Yes.
that's really cool. That's interesting. I don't think, yeah, we all of my writing groups that I've been in have been submit and then evaluate and then bring in your critique and then do the critique there.
Right. I mean, we did have the one-off where I think we had like one story to do, and then the rest of the writing group that day was reading excerpts from your stories.
Right. But that was fun validation. That
Yes.
wasn't like
Yeah, yeah.
critiquing that. That was just
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
All right. So we've kind of talked about a little bit about the basics of what a writing group is and how it's different from just asking a casual beta reader for some input. And we've kind of allowed the panelists to talk about their own little writing groups a little differently. And actually one last point specifically for Mog and TJ. So another question I would have, since you all are in a non-furry focused writing group, so are you out as a furry to your writing group cohorts?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I figured I would mention that just to give the audience that data point. I would ask that. So
I mean, interestingly enough, to bounce off that and potentially slightly jumping ahead, the way I actually stumbled into my writing group was at a furry con. There are two people there who were selling books at this con, like, hey, you should come to this we're a writing group, you should come join us. I'm like, okay, why not? And the first thing I shared was actually a safe work story, which is going to be in furry trash. But yeah, shared that there, and it's like, yep, nope, this is what it is. I write animal people. Have fun. Go.
So actually, let's go ahead and jump ahead to that. So we'll start with the question of how did you find your group, which you led into that perfectly. But also for the panelists, if you didn't find a group, how was your group started, or did you help start it?
All right. So,
Connie started my second writing group.
No, I didn't. Had nothing to do with that.
so yeah, the Cincinnati fiction writers. Did Wendy start it, or did she take it over?
She took it over.
She took it over. Okay. So it was originally started. It was started on Meetup, right?
Yep.
Site called Meetup.com, just through the writing, and these people basically got together, and it was taken over by Wendy Vogel, who is she's a very good author, and she's kind of the linchpin of the whole thing. She holds it together. And I found it through this guy. He's like, hey, I know we've just kind of met, but I go to this writing group thing. Would you like to check it out? And I was like, sure.
You do words. You signed a
And-
book. I signed a book for you. Come work with us.
Right, exactly. And then they spent the next several months trying to figure out my name.
I wish that Skunk was here.
Right.
Because Skunk did a lot of really great heavy lifting trying to pull us together.
Yeah.
He saw like writing groups that were happening on the West Coast, and he was like, oh, I know a good few writers in like the DC area and in Maryland who are like people that I want to share with and I want to get critiques from, and I would like to work with these people for a writing group. And he like got people together, he like organized us, and we set up a first meeting. It went well, and we started doing it regularly from there.
Yeah.
All you have to do is look around you and find other writers. If it's not in person and there are no people in person to do it with, you can do it online on Discord. Our writing group is on Discord.
Interestingly enough, I will almost kind of sort of say I do have a third writing group, and I don't know if they'll agree or not. That's up to them. Me, Mog, and JD have a side chat that we kind of have going.
I mean, that's
And
true.
it's more one of those things where we just started talking so regularly through the Furry Writers Guild. We were side chatting each other, and somebody has an idea for an anthology. We're still kind of like scaring ourselves about maybe doing. We have no idea. Because what is this? Why are we doing this? But still, it's like, hey, I always know if I need something read like soon-ish, I can turn to these two and just like, hey guys, beta trade? Or just read this for me because I like you and you like me. Please help.
Now, the thing I don't know is, are the Furry Writers Guild forums for everybody, or are they only for members?
The forums,
They are open to everyone.
the forums are open to everybody.
So that might
However-
also be a nice venue for you to go on
Yes.
the forum and look for.
Yep, you can. There actually is a section there requesting critiques. I would highly recommend that. If and when you do have your first publication, there is some other stuff available for members. But really, most of what I consider the important stuff and the really super duper helpful stuff is available to everyone.
Yeah,
Yes.
straight from the get-go. Register and then take a look around those forums.
Forums, Slack, Telegram.
There's a
When you go to, like, say you want to add members to your writing group, you have to vet them any, or as far as?
So it depends on the type of group you have. For example, my RAR group, we kind of did RAR together, so that's kind of our group, hard stop.
We've had some things at the fiction writers, though.
Now, yeah, at the Cincinnati Fiction Writers, it's the public group is displayed publicly on Meetup.com. You just walk on in, share whatever you like. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's like, okay, we need to put on our kid gloves because we want to make sure that this was a story. You shared a story, and there were words in orders and sentences. And we're going to try to be nice and give you, because this needs work. And we got to try to be very, very careful we don't scare people away, because sometimes things need a lot of work.
And sometimes people bring in very questionable things for their first share. I mean, one of the rules at the Cincinnati Fiction Writers, which I highly agree with, but some people don't follow, is you're not supposed to share until you've sat in and actually seen how the critiquing works. And I think if more people did that, it would be a much better experience. But some people come in and straight away end up sharing something, or they completely ignore how we do things and share something that's absolutely terrible. And I mean, and I'm not talking like terrible quality-wise. I'm talking like terrible content-wise.
So if I could actually tell a bit of a story based off that, there was one gentleman who shared the first 10 pages of his second novel, and it's the one time I actually had to apologize to people afterwards because I was rude to the rest of the group as well, and I felt bad for that after the fact. Not to toot my own horn, I kind of think I'm a decent reader, especially in our group, and others have said that as well. And I tried reading this story, and it starts off with a lot of history and or mythological Greek names, and I don't know how to pronounce them to save my life. And I'm stumbling over them and trying to force my way through reading this. And I make it through the first page, someone else stumbles through the second page and the third page. It wasn't until probably about page 7 that we finally get to names we can pronounce. And when we start trying to critique this story, this is why I said defending yourself is different from explaining yourself. This gentleman wanted to defend himself. Every single critique we gave was a defense, and a defense, and a defense, and a defense. And the reason I felt I had to apologize is because when I'm like, okay, I have some positives here. Let me give you my positives, and then I'll give you my critique. It's like, well, the first page wasn't read right. Oh, hi, phone. That's shiny. I don't care what you have to think anymore because you're just going to be that douche, okay?
If you create an antagonistic relationship between yourself and the person who is doing you a favor by beta reading for you, they're not going to want to do that again.
Right.
They put in time and effort to go through, carefully analyze your story, and do this work to help you make your story better. And if you're going to fight them on things that they thought were potentially improvable, then they are going to walk out of it and say, I put a lot of work into helping them, and they kind of just said screw off, and so I'm going to not do that again.
One more question?
Yeah.
I actually have the opposite problem of that guy. I actually take too much feedback from some people and it starts ripping apart my stories. How do you know when to say, like, I understand that feedback, but I'm kind of sticking to my guns on this?
Can I take that?
Experience, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. No, it is experience. What you need to do to get better at knowing how to receive feedback and what feedback is most valuable for your story is start critiquing other people. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Read other stuff, start critiquing their work, and it'll just kind of click. It's like, okay, so I know this piece is definitely important. This one, I can take that under advisement, probably won't change, but yeah. Do the critiquing yourself, and you'll get better at receiving critique.
Okay.
Another thing with that too, had that exact problem recently with my Rabbit Dies first story for that anthology that recently closed for submissions, and I had a critique by a person who had some things wrong with it, and I was like, okay, let's change that. Another critique that was like completely different, who pointed out different problems and a few that I didn't agree with. But so what I did there was I went to 2 other people and I said, this is something I'm worried about. What do you think about this? And I sent them the critique because sometimes someone's opinions, everyone has opinions about what they like or don't like in fiction, and that's not always the best thing for your story. But it really helps to get a base idea of like a general consensus, maybe two to four people who either agree or don't agree on something. If it's like 2 to 2 agreeing to not agree, then just you can go with your gut and do what you think, what you wanted to do. Or maybe it's like overwhelmingly the other way, and you're like, whoa, I need to reevaluate this. And that can really help you just getting, and this is something a writing group is great for, because if you've got 4 people in a room, we've definitely had discussions on like us disagreeing on what should be changed about a story and having like splits between the middle. And you get some really interesting conversations about that and some interesting choices.
Interesting. And I do think a little bit that does come down to knowing your story and knowing what you like, what should stay, and knowing what's important to your story. For example, I actually remember something that 2 people here have read and critiqued. And I had this meta story inside this other story that I personally loved. I loved that story, and I wanted to keep that in so bad. And I got feedback from Mog, and is like, cut this out. I'm like, I'm going to ignore that. Yay, ignoring feedback. And I got feedback from somebody else who said, cut this out. I'm like, okay, I guess I have to consider this now. Then I got feedback from a third person. The hell is this meta story? Get it out of there. It's so poorly written. I'm like, fine, it's gone.
Yeah.
So, panelists, what, if you could give someone who's thinking about looking or starting a group, what's one piece of advice that you feel you could offer based on your own experiences, either joining groups or helping start and found groups, that someone who's looking for a group maybe should keep in mind when they're doing their own research and they're doing their own searching for a group of people to share critique with?
What do you think, JD?
Well, mine's kind of easy. I'm the quiet guy who doesn't say anything, as you can tell from him getting me to talk now. And my advice on if someone you're looking to join a writing group, because God knows I'm not going to be starting one, don't say no. Don't, introverts, we have that tendency to shut down, go away, ignore things. Don't say no. Because, yeah, it's been a very good experience for me. Even though I did want to say no initially.
Yeah, I want to say no too, but I will totally agree that it has 100% helped my writing, and got me actual more friends that were writers. So that's just another side benefit. I would say look for people who are critiquing kindly. If you go into you test out the writing group, and everybody is being 100% brutal to you, or even majority of them being brutal to you, you don't need casual brutality. You might need hard words sometimes, but if they're just tearing you down, then you get out.
No one leaving remarks about licking shiny red eject buttons.
Yeah,
Like, that
exactly.
should be a,
God, yeah.
that should be a red flag. Sorry, go ahead, panelists.
Okay, well, I'd say as far as finding a group, the internet's a good place to do that. If you don't just happen to luck into it, with friends that
Drag you along.
I did. Now, I guess I could say that I officially started my RAR writing group because I made the Telegram group and then invited everybody to it. So, yeah, I guess that means I have experience founding a writing group. So, as far as actually how to found one, I'm not the best to ask that question. But yeah, as far as finding goes, like the meetup.com, there are multiple writing groups in our area on Meetup. So that's something you could check out. And again, it might not necessarily be furry, but for TJ and I, that's been a very good experience.
And don't treat furry as a stain. You're writing good fiction. If you go in there and you say, hey, I also have animal people that talk, and they start giving you shit about it, then that's also not valid. You should get the hell out.
Something I would recommend, as Mog said, if you're going to join one that's already existing, listen. Walk in, listen. Don't focus on presenting. Honestly, I wouldn't necessarily even focus on giving feedback yet until you know what the rest of the group is doing and how they work. If you have that opportunity, as I said, our meetup one is a local one. It's open to the public and anyone can walk in. Highly recommend just sitting there and listening, experiencing what we're like the first time. I'm not sure if y'all are open for that sort of thing and available to do that, but if that's an option available, it's to see how your group exists and how they already exist with each other and collaborate and how they work. Gives you that opportunity to experience that before you try to throw your own 2 cents in and end up throwing it on your ass.
So, since we've had like 6 people talk, I may have missed it if someone mentioned this already, because my memory is short and fleeting, but fickle. It's fickle like an otter's mind.
Or a goldfish.
Yes. Hey, we eat goldfish.
You are what you eat.
So, anyway, one thing that I think is a really good way to like get together a writing group is first find singular beta readers, and like find those people who you're willing to swap stories with, and establish some like story swapping beta for them. Get some critiques from them, and then maybe like once you've got a few, 2, 3, or 4 people that you swap stories with, just say, hey, I'd like to start doing a writing group. I'd like to do this regularly. I've got a few other people who I think would be good candidates. If you've got anyone who beta reads for you and you think would be good fit, let me know, and maybe we can start a group for this. And then you just take these people that you already have established as a beta reader and sort of create a structure around it where you get this more focused, collaborative experience. And I think that's a good way to just sort of slowly build up a writing group.
All right, so panelists, I think the next thing we'll go ahead and talk about is we've kind of talked about how you can go about finding a writing group. We've talked about what they are. You've shared some great personal experiences on your own experiences in your own writing groups. But what about the impact overall? And I figured that this will probably be a very short discussion, or maybe it'll be a long discussion that'll take the rest of the time that we have for the panel. I have no idea. But do each of you feel that your writing group has helped you improve? And if so, which element do you think it's helped you improve in the most? And that being said, some other add-on questions to that is, do you also feel that your critical analysis skills when it comes to writing have improved by being exposed to other people's writing? And do you feel like your feedback has I'm not going to say improved, but your feedback has become more comprehensive?
I'll say
because you're
improved
looking
for
at different elements. Wow.
Yeah, I used to write really. The thing is, I for the longest time, it was me and my one friend, and we would trade betas back and forth. And we were merciless with each other. We would redline the shit out of everything. We would
language.
Yeah, it's PG-13. You can deal with it. We would redline everything and just go deep in. And it was sort of understood. It was understood between us that we liked each other's stories. But then when I moved out of that like sort of closed off space and started interacting with other writers, and I got critiques from them, and I started doing critiques the only way that I knew how, it was really kind of a shocking experience, because I like gave these critiques that just tore things apart and didn't talk about anything good in people's writings, and that's not the way to do it. Because when you're critiquing, you are hitting a very vulnerable point, which is someone's personal time and effort and how valued it is, and you're saying this can be better. But you need to be able to say, okay, I recognize that, and these are the things that you're doing well, because just as important it's just as important to notice the things that you do well as a writer as it is to notice the things that you need to improve on. And having that kind of stuff in a writing group and everything can really help to balance it. When you're doing a one-on-one critique, it's really easy to overlook this kind of stuff and maybe even be like, oh, they just didn't appreciate my critique. They just didn't know how to take it. But when you've got a group of like 5 people, everyone moderates. Everyone works together and is able to moderate it. And I especially, like, after those first few critiques, I like quickly got my crap together and was like, okay, I need to reevaluate how I'm doing this. And I still give a lot of like redlining structural critique, but I make sure to note, I love the way you do this. I think that this is a really strong setting. I like these characters a lot. To quickly answer the question, I think that the thing that I've gotten better at the most from the specific writing group in DC that we've had was character depth. I write a lot of character arcs, but they don't tend to always be the deepest characters, the most fleshed out characters. They've got a very strong emotional arc to them, but you guys have helped me a lot with building out these characters and giving them things to interact with in the world and to set themselves up and base themselves on, I think.
I know personally, especially with the Cincinnati fiction writers, one of the reasons that, one of the bigger reasons, especially with that group, I do recommend just listening, is just listening. You can pick up a lot of things. Sometimes you pick up things too much, like nothing but action tags and not using set once in a story.
Is Heat's story?
It has been fixed. But I picked that up and I started using action tags a lot more, and it helped the pace of my story. You pick up these minor structural things. Use of adverbs, try to limit them. We argue about that all the time because of it. And just things, it's a way to, in general, I've picked up a lot of things from hearing other people's critiques and the feedback they've gotten. How they handled one issue or how they responded to something. It's a way to help me build my own writing and get better that way.
Don't look at me, do your panel.
There's another person who's in our writing group.
Yes. Ocean was in.
Reading my story, by the way.
I should.
Just come in
I'm
and sit
almost
down.
done. I got 4 pages left.
Just come in and sit down.
I had 4 pages left then, and I still do too.
So these are the arguments that sometimes happens in a writing group. It's hilarious.
Just come in and sit down. All right, fine, go please.
Well, to that point, as you guys kind of start to know each other, and to your harshness thing, do you find that you actually start to critique each other differently, and maybe even less harshly, as you kind of can extrapolate?
No. So when I was
Everyone just said no.
when I was teasing him about his critiquing getting better, when you know somebody, I will turn to Mog or JD and say, "What the heck did you give me, you fool?
Right.
You're better than this. What is this crap here? Fix this now before you try to give me this again."
That is something to remember about a writing group. If you are specifically asking them to tell you what's wrong with something, be prepared because you have given them that trust, and they will tell you.
Yeah.
Also to bring up the PG-13, I do have a series of notes from one group of critiques, and the first words I wrote on the paper were the words, "Oh shit."
But it comes from a
that
place
does
of love.
happen.
It comes from a
But
place of love.
it's better for it, I hope.
Never ask for critique for validation. That is
Yes.
not how you get validation. You don't post your story online and say, please critique this, and then expect it to be good because of the work that you put into it. When you ask someone to critique it, they will critique it. They will give you what you want, even if what you want, and they will give you what you ask for, even if what you actually want is just to feel good about the story. There's a different way you ask that. You say, could you read my story and tell me if you liked it?
Yeah.
That's asking for validation. If you say, could you read my story and give me a critique or tell me what you think could be improved, and then you're like hoping, oh, just a few things. I only want them to say a few things because it's going to be awesome. You will be disappointed, and it will be very hard to deal with.
Does your critique change based on what the story's eventual destination is versus it being in a book just for personal?
That all depends.
or-
That's a question that's going to vary. I would think not necessarily vary from the group, but vary on the story and what the writer's goals are with it. If I come up and say, hey, I'm looking to do this as a personal collection, I'll go there. I had other stories like, hey, it's going for this theme. Does this theme fit?
Yeah, I would agree with that because, as TJ mentioned, JD and I we're all in this little group, and we will specifically share stories like, hey, does this fit the theme of this anthology? If it's kind of on the edge, so that's happened with us before.
Is there enough resistance in this?
Yes.
Right.
Is there enough resistance? Is this dystopia enough? So, train of thought derailed. Okay, so I was talking about the things, the writing groups. Yes, writing groups in particular. Big difference between our old guard writing group and the Cincinnati fiction writers. The fiction writers, you will see a lot of critique, just because you get that little snippet, the 10 pages of the double-spaced, and how limited it is, so you get a very narrow scope, versus actually reading more of a story like an entire novel. In that sense, you have as the reader, you have a much broader picture of what's going on, where the story's going, the character development. So that will change the critique. So, yeah, that's all I had to say.
I would say, okay, so I'm not sure I can identify a particular part of my stories that has improved from being in the writing group, other than the stories themselves have improved. How my critique style has changed, at least within the writing group, how specific grammatical errors drive me nuts. For some people, I will point them out, and if I see them again in the next story, I'll still point them out. And I see them again in the next story, then I'm going like, okay, well, you are clearly choosing to do this. I am now being annoying by pointing it out, so it's gone. Since I thought of this, and I thought about this earlier, and I was going to say it, and I want to make sure I get it in. One of the things we do in the writing group is you check with your fellow writers and say, if you're having trouble with the story, it has like in my stories, they're horror. It has blood, it has body horror, it has all sorts of things. If you don't feel good reading it, don't read it. There are plenty of other people in the group that can help me out. Don't worry about it. So I think that's something important to consider when if you form a writing group, give people an out. If somebody doesn't want to read and not safe for work, that's cool.
I'm terrible at self-evaluation, so yeah, again, I can't really say what's improved, except I've improved. My metric is every story that I've given to the writing group that went on to be submitted for publication, except for one, got accepted. So, yeah, I'm improving somewhere, even if I'm not exactly sure where.
Just because it's funny, I'm going to toot his horn for him. When we were doing beta trades for Heat, and going through Heat, I did the thing where I'm like, I don't like that comment. I don't like that comment. So I'm going to politely ignore that comment, but I'll take other things. Story got accepted. Holy crap! Yay, yay! And I started getting feedback. And the editor was basically saying, "Do this thing. Do this thing." How am I going to do this thing? Okay, I guess I can do this thing. I guess I can do this thing. Send it back to him. Say, "Hey, I did the things. How's that sound? Does it sound like I did the things enough?" He's like, "You mean all the things I told you to do the first time through?"
Yeah.
All right, so at this point, we're out of talking material unless you all want to give some brief blurbs on etiquette, but I think that maybe the audience might want to ask some more open-ended or unstructured questions. So at this point, if folks in the audience have questions, you should totally ask this wonderful group of panelists here in front of us. So I saw you gentlemen in the white shirt.
So I joined an online writing group last year that unfortunately had the issue of momentum. After the first couple rounds of trades, just kind of everyone got busy and just sort of stopped happening. Is there any advice you could give on avoiding that, or maybe resuscitating a group like that, where you're like, I'm really excited to work with these people, but things just kind of don't happen?
Unfortunately, the resuscitation effort might have to be on you wholly if you want to do that, because remember, the very first thing I said, Have you heard of herding cats?
Yeah.
Set a scheduled time. Our writing group, just every writing group, we choose a time, the date the next month when most of us can make it. If some of us can't make it, we're still going to hold the writing group. We're going to try to optimize it so that the most people can make it as possible, but we don't stop it if people can't come. If you do something, maybe like online especially, it's important to do something like maybe the first Sunday of every month or something like that. And if 2 people can make it, you still hold the writing group. You still do it with 2 people and make sure it happens, and the next month it happens again. And just keeping it going as long as there are the people who are coming, whether or not like 3 or 4 people aren't able to show up, will eventually pay off in dividends.
I might actually even bounce off that and just say augment the group. If you guys have been doing these regular meets and the meets fell apart, keep in contact with that group. I'll admit, my RAR class, we haven't had an actual critique session in probably a year.
No, we did one this spring, didn't we?
Yeah.
Did we in spring?
Yeah.
Oh.
You were, remember you were talking about that.
Oh, probably.
Yes,
I don't remember.
because that one over there didn't submit his story until 2 days later.
Oh,
2 days
right.
before he gave it to us.
But still, it's if you can. Okay, I don't remember it then. There's that.
It was ironically the Sphinx story.
Right. That's not ironic. Yes, I actually do remember that. He actually modified your group's response because of our group. That's right.
Right.
But it's something I could say is if you can't do the regular meets, first of all, plan it once a quarter. Having that, throw it out there. Oh, can I do next month? I don't know. Do you have plans 2 months from now? 3 months from now? Not yet, probably. I'd assume, maybe. Try then. Actually, one thing we were trying to do was trying to actually do a in-person group here at AC because most of us are together. Unfortunately, no one herding cats happened or didn't happen.
Also, the thing is, we had all the submission deadlines that everyone's ready for
Just
right
before.
this.
Right.
So that you aren't going to like submit it and then edit it because that's an exercise in futility and feeling terrible about your story.
Hey, we did that for Dystopia and still got accepted.
That's awesome. That's awesome. But it makes you worry so much because you're like, everything I did was wrong and I should have fixed this. Oh my God, how will they ever love this story?
But I might still suggest
Isn't
augment.
that every submission?
Yes. If you can't,
true.
but if you can't do the regular meetups, you can't do the hey, we're going to sit together on Discord at our computers for 3 hours and talk. Hey, just start socializing. That's what our group is halfway turned into. It's we do those social aspects of we're just going to chat. Every now and then it's like, hey, I have this story I'm super proud of, and you read this before. I actually did that with Orrery for Fang 9. I'm like, hey, you gave me such great feedback on the story before. Can you give me more feedback on it now? And you can do that with a direct person, or you can just do that with the whole room. It's like, hey, I have the story for this deadline. Does someone have time to give me a critique on it? It may not be the whole group, all 5 people getting together and giving you feedback at once, but hey, one's more than you had before.
Yes. I think I pulled down the Fang story too.
And I guess I would say, so the writing group that kind of petered out, have you gone to them and said, hey, things petered out, are there specific things that we can fix that you all think, is there some issue that we haven't addressed that maybe needs to get sorted out? Because it could also just be that.
It's been discussed a little bit, but
Yeah.
I guess not really an answer was come up with, so.
Or herding cats.
Yeah.
All right, and then there's the gentleman in the blue.
So, when I write, I'm kind of selfish and possessive of what I'm writing, so I don't want to share like rough drafts. I don't want to show anybody until I actually have something that's finished. How do you share your finished works, or do you share your rough drafts? Or?
Just bite your tongue and get it out there.
Yeah,
Your wedding was awful.
Yeah,
Your wedding was awful. That was so rough and needed to be fixed.
I try not to share 0 drafts. I try to at least proofread them. But yes, you definitely need to share your rough drafts. Once you got a story on paper, get out there, get eyes on it, because you are too close to it. This is something you have focused on with hyper focused laser vision, and in your mind everything has worked correctly. You actually need someone who doesn't have that kind of intent focus and picture of what it's supposed to be to look it over and let you know, hey, this glazed over here, this didn't work here. So yeah, definitely share your rough drafts.
yeah.
With my fixed story again, I had a really clear idea of my main character Antef's motivations
Right.
and how they were structured throughout the story. And when other people were reading the story, they were like, why is this the case? And I was like, oh, that's because this. But the thing is, the readers didn't know that because I didn't do a good enough job of actually making the obvious motivations through the story. And it was really, really helpful to figure out where those disassociations were.
Right.
All right, any other questions?
I was going to ask, have you guys ever used a group to kind of get past the writer's block, like come with a seed of an idea and actually use the group successfully to kind of help build on something we could take back, write into something, and then represent?
I actually did that here with Rabbit's Eyes First. I had this thing, I knew what I wanted to do. I had critique and feedback from Otter that I knew, like, okay, cool, I know what this scene is. I know how I want to do the scene. You know my story, so I'm going to go ahead. Okay, so here's the idea I have.
About it. It was
and
wonderful.
This is pissing me off because I know I want this to go here and this to go here, but the logic for the world doesn't work with this here. How do I fix this? Okay,
I want to talk more about how you finished that, about what you do with it.
You can read the draft. It's in the group.
Ooh, I'll do that. I haven't been checking Telegram this morning, but I will do that.
Yeah, I haven't ever done that, but actually it's something that would be entirely valid within the group and probably a good idea.
Didn't you read though when we were doing all the readings? I thought you read something.
I don't think I did. If I did, maybe I read the
Maybe not.
the Banshee thing.
Yeah, I think it was me, Sparf, and Alkani who read.
And Skunk.
And Skunk. Skunk also. Oh, it was the fun game show piece that was.
Yeah, yeah.
But what we did at a meet, we had one story to critique, and then some of us, I think Alkani had the good idea of like, hey, I'm working on something, and I'm excited about it, but I'm having a bit of trouble with motivation. Can I read it to you guys and like work on it and get excitement about this? I may be like completely bastardizing your motivations
I
on
think
this.
it might actually been.
And was it Sparf?
Yeah, it might have been smart.
Yeah, what?
Yeah. Sparf's in our DC writing group.
Yes.
We're talking about when you brought in the piece and you're like, hey, I'm working on this and I'm excited about it, but like there are a few things that I'm worried about and I want to get like a kickstart on it. So can I just read like a piece of this and just like get that out there? And then Alkani followed up and I followed up, and it was a great way. We used the writing group and we got some motivation on this work. We just read it aloud, kickstarted our excitement to move forward onto the next scene. And we talked about, I think in the last panel, about the dangers of getting that validation before you finish the story. But in a controlled manner, you can help your motivation by doing that kind of thing with a friend and talking about about different plans and brainstorming.
Actually, I have. It was that brutal critique that I mentioned earlier.
Oh, right.
I hadn't written for like 3 months and had been kind of completely writer's blocked. And then that happened. And I said, well, I'm starting this story over. And I did.
That took you a moment, though. I was about to
That
fight
did,
you.
in fact, get me going.
Now, had that been an old story, or was that you wrote it up for us and then we were meeting?
That was an old story, and when I started completely over. Yeah, that was one of the danger. It's like, okay, this story got rejected. Can you guys tell me why?
Yeah.
And
And
they
they
told
did.
you.
Yeah, and that's actually I was rejected from Dissident Signals, and I had not availed myself of the writing group. It was the deadlines were just not working out right, and so I wrote it and submitted it, and it didn't make it in. So then I submitted it to them and said, "Hey, so what was wrong with it, guys? What was terrible?" And they gave me pretty good feedback.
Any other questions?
Was we probably already answered this. As far as location goes, where is your group sat pretty much?
Yes.
We have DC, you know that, that's what I remember, but is there any for any particular region or statewide that you know about, I'd say specifically Illinois?
Well, the internet is a wonderful place.
Where in Illinois are you? Are you
Central.
okay? Yeah, that'd be a long drive.
Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to make your way out to Cincinnati, there's a few of us there. I might actually recommend reaching out to the Furry Writers Guild. Starting there, that could be a way. The Slack chat has a channel expressly for beta trades. Telegram people have asked there, not as successful because Telegram's a little bit more chatty than, not in a bad way. I love the Telegram chat, just chatty a little bit more. Sometimes actually really interesting discussions do happen there about writing, the process, and all that other fun stuff. But the forums also is a great place to ask for feedback. I would suggest be detailed with what you're looking for, the information on your story, how long it is, all that other fun stuff. Because sometimes stories are, especially with deadlines right around the corner, if you're writing for an anthology that has a deadline in, say, 3 weeks, and you're over here trying to be like, hey, I have the story that I'm looking for. It's helpful to know what you really are presenting to the group, and try to give a heads up of, hey, yeah, this is a 5,000 word story, and I'm looking for this type of feedback on this.
Sometimes you will just get unlucky, and your city might not have any real other furry writers or enough to really form a group. And again, online groups are still really good and very helpful. And getting a few beta readers and asking those beta readers if they want to do a regular thing, that can just be a great way to form a group from across the country, wherever you have people that are willing to work and put the time in, and that's a perfectly good way to do it.
I know a while back, SoFurry actually had where you could form groups within the site itself, and there were some that were just for story sharing. I haven't looked into that because I got involved with the Furry Writers Guild and things like that. So it's just, I can't keep track of tons of groups. I have trouble with the 2.5 basically that I'm in.
All right, any other questions?
I have a non-group related question, but I want to make sure.
Non-writing group related question?
A non-writing group related, but more specifically about these guys.
I'd say ask that after the
Oh, okay.
That way, if other people don't want to listen to it, they can. Okay. Well, in that case, thank you very much for showing up. We hope that this has been helpful to you, and we hope that if you are searching for writing groups, that you will go forth, search on the internet. Remember, there is always the Furry Writers Guild, which is a great resource. They do have a Telegram, a Slack, and forums available. Does anyone recall the URL for that offhand?
FurryWritersGuild.com.
Okay. So FurryWritersGuild.com.
And the top left corner, or top right corner is a link to the forums directly.
Yep. And of course, you're welcome to talk to the panelists. I know there is another panel here at 1 p.m., so we could definitely stay in this room and talk for a little bit, but I'm sure that the next panel will probably want to start getting set up at least 5 minutes beforehand. So once again, thank you very much for coming, and if we could please give all of our panelists a round of applause.